Today's video is about the Canadian state's invasion of Wet'suwet'en territory, something I've spoken about in the past, but the situation has quietly escalated into an all-out war against an indigenous sovereign nation. The situation is disgusting and infuriating, but I'm going to attempt to maintain a pleasant and humorous tone in this video for two reasons. Firstly, I want you to watch it. I think it's important, and I don't know any other way to make people pay attention to me. Secondly, this anger doesn't really belong to me, and I think it'd be a little rich for me to act all indignant about people like me stealing for the benefit of people like me. So if it seems like I'm being glib, I apologize. Please understand that I do not know what I am doing. If you're unfamiliar with the subject, let me go into just the barest of bones. A company named TC Energy is trying to build a $6 billion natural gas pipeline across northern British Columbia. Part of the pipeline would cross over territory that belongs to the Wet'suwet'en Nation, a sovereign indigenous nation that has never ceded its territory to the Canadian government. For all intents and purposes, this land is not Canada. It's not British Columbia, so I probably shouldn't have called it that a second ago. It's Wet'suwet'en territory. Canada has no claim to it. I say for all intents and purposes because, as you could probably imagine, that distinction was completely ignored as soon as it became convenient to do so. When TC Energy wanted to build their poisonous pipeline through Wet'suwet'en territory, they did not consult with or receive permission from traditional hereditary chiefs, who opposed its construction on the basis that fucking obviously, because the pipeline intersected one of the most important rivers in the territory and would definitely poison shit. In response to this illegal invasion, a group of protesters set up a blockade along the proposed path of the pipeline, which, again, they shouldn't have to do, because TC Energy has no legal right to build it. They can't just go into Wet'suwet'en territory. Full stop. They have no legal ability to do that. In a world where the rule of law was obeyed, regardless of who it benefited, and not simply when it benefited the rich and powerful, this would probably be where the story ended. But we do not live in such a world. TC Energy sought and received an injunction against the blockade, which I really want to get this point across, was not illegal, so that they could break it up and build their, and let me just emphasize this, illegal pipeline. The RCMP were called in and arrested a bunch of protesters, and the blockade was dismantled, but then more blockades were set up, and ever since then, there's been a war of attrition between the RCMP and protesters defending their traditional land. For American viewers, I feel compelled to point out that the RCMP, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police, are who you would call Mounties. The whimsical cartoon police of Dudley Do-Right, who always get their man. Dopey, altruistic figures in all sorts of pop culture. Perhaps they conjure up images of frontier lawmen with naive but unbreakable codes of honor, rescuing women from villains who tie them to train tracks for some reason. And that's not what they're like. If you have such a rosy view of the Mounties, if you think of them as quaint relics, allow me to disabuse you of that perception. I'm going to quote directly from The Guardian here, from an article discussing how the RCMP handled raids in 2019. Canadian police were prepared to shoot Indigenous land defenders blockading construction of a natural gas pipeline in northern British Columbia, according to documents seen by The Guardian. Notes from a strategy session for a militarized raid on ancestral lands of the Wet'suwet'en Nation show that commanders of Canada's National Police Force, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, argued that lethal overwatch is required, a term for deploying an officer who is prepared to use lethal force. The RCMP commanders also instructed officers to, quote, this is a quote, use as much violence towards the gate as you want, end quote, that was a quote, ahead of the operation to remove a roadblock, which had been erected by the Wet'suwet'en people to control access to their territories and stop construction of the proposed 670-kilometer coastal GasLink pipeline. In a separate document, an RCMP officer states that arrests would be necessary for, quote, and I'm quoting here, this is a quote, get ready for the quote, sterilizing the site, end quote. Just, that was a quote, so you know. No rules, just go nuts, just get as violent as you want. How else are we going to sterilize the site? You know, from the human dirt that must be cleansed. That's the thing we're saying out loud now. When you start talking about using as much violence as you want to sterilize an environment of human beings, how do you not stop yourself and say, maybe we're the bad guys in this scenario? Believe it or not, it somehow gets worse. The Guardian goes on to say, Police established a media exclusion zone, blocking reporters from accessing the area. They took care to hide their carbine rifles on the approach to the roadblock because the, quote, optics, end quote, of the weapons were, quote, not good, end quote. The documents also show close collaboration, their word, not mine, between the RCMP and TC Energy. Police officers attended company planning sessions and daily, quote, tailgate, end quote, meetings, and were privy to CGL's legal strategy. Sometimes, on this channel, I talk about how capital and the state reinforce one another and that the state does the bidding of capital. Rarely, though, is it this transparent. Normally there's a couple of layers in between to keep things nice and obscure. Rarely do you just see them go, yeah, we're working for the oil and gas company. How else are we going to sterilize the site? The Guardian goes on to say, the RCMP were prepared to arrest children and grandparents. Quote, no exception, everyone will be arrested in the injunction area, end quote, a document reads. Another makes reference to possible child apprehension by social services, a troubling disclosure given the violent history of residential schooling in Canada and the disproportionate number of Indigenous children currently in the child welfare system. This is an act of genocide, any way you slice it. It's actually multiple acts of genocide. According to this obscure little human rights organization you might have heard of called the United Nations on a little planet called Earth, genocide is defined as any of the following acts. Killing members of the group. Check. They were willing to do that. Their lethal overwatch may be required. Let's do a genocide. Check. Got that one. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group. That's a major check on that one. They're clubbing people, they're doing all sorts of bodily harm and mental harm. Are you fucking kidding me? Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Like, say, poisoning one of their key rivers, so that's a big check on that one. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Okay, well, this one you got me on a bit of a technicality because they're not doing this in Wet'suwet'en territory specifically, but it is being done to Indigenous people all over Canada, writ large, so I'm going to give it a big old check anyway. Forcibly transferring children to the group to another group. Check again. They were going to give them to social services. That's a check on that. It's all the different kinds of genocide as outlined by the UN. So if you leave a comment that this is not a genocide, then, that's the moral equivalent of Holocaust denial. There's no distinction between the act of denying one genocide over another. It's certainly not the first act of genocide the Canadian state, or the RCMP in particular, have carried out against Indigenous peoples. It's a continuation of a long and bloody legacy of suppression, impoverishment, and murder. The fact that the Canadian state feels it's entitled to enforce its laws over territory it has no jurisdiction over reveals their respect for human rights as the polite fiction it has always been. Make no mistake that Canada, the country that I am a citizen of, is illegitimate to its core. It does not govern with the consent of the people. Though it may have the consent of the governed from time to time, by coincidence, it acts in the service of the wealthy regardless of what the people demand. Agreements and rules they create to protect you will be abandoned at their leisure. I don't have the PhDs required to list even 1/10 of the times that the Canadian federal government has ignored or broken treaties with Indigenous nations. The Canadian state agrees to these treaties not because it intends to honor them, but as a bargaining chip to ease dissent. They are words on paper and nothing more. Annoyingly, as protests have erupted all over the country in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en people, there's a talking point that keeps coming up again and again from our leaders and elected officials. This is a nation of laws. We must respect the rule of law. We need law and order. Laws, law, law. And I find this chilling. That our elected officials can say this with a straight face, including the British Columbian Premier, the Canadian equivalent to a governor for Americans who can't be bothered to Google, and our head of state Justin Trudeau, who's normally very sensitive to racial issues because he himself occasionally looks like a person of color. Trudy said the following on the matter. Obviously, it's extremely important to respect the right to freely demonstrate peacefully, but we need to make sure that the laws are respected, and that's why I'm going to be engaging with my ministers and looking at what possible next steps there are. Also, infuriatingly, from the same interview on the subject of human rights, Trudy said, I bring up human rights everywhere I go. Every time I have an opportunity to speak with leaders or talk about Canadian values, wow, or Canadian approaches to the world, In our conversations, of course I talk about human rights. We recognize there's always more work to do everywhere around the world. Well, what more can I do about human rights? I talk about them all the time. I talk about Canadian values. What more could I possibly do as the leader of a country currently carrying out a shitload of genocides to help with human rights? I'm opening a discussion. I'm engaging with people. I'm the hero of this story. The state, the police, they can break the law as they please. They can ignore the sovereignty of another nation as they please. They can arrest reporters and trample on freedom of the press as they please. They can commit acts of genocide. They can kill and maim and steal people's babies as they please. But when protesters shut down a railway line, that cannot be tolerated because this is a nation of laws. You can't drop a banner in support of the people we're arresting for defending their homes. Let's have a dialogue about it. And if the dialogue doesn't work, how about you just let us do whatever we want? Which I gotta tell you, we're gonna do anyway because we do have all of the guns and tanks. The rule of law is just that. We are being ruled, and that rule is enforced by law. They will trample anyone who stands in the way of their objectives simply because they can, and then turn around and complain that their subjects had the audacity not to respect orders. The reason I'm making this video now about a situation that's been unfolding for literal years is because on February 6th, the RCMP raided 2 camps in Wet'suwet'en Territory and made a bunch more arrests, clearing the way for CGL and seemed to be getting the upper hand in the conflict. As I alluded to earlier, however, this has caused all sorts of grassroots protests to spring up in solidarity with the rallying cry of "Shut Down Canada." Perhaps the most famous protest ongoing right now is a little bit east of Toronto, where I live, in a territory called Tyendinaga, where a group of Mohawk have completely shut down via rail operations between Toronto and Montreal with an impromptu blockade made of people's vehicles and snowplows. Similarly, commuter trains in Montreal have been disrupted by protesters, and there's been all sorts of marches and banner drops. People camped out in front of the BC legislature. People marched on Capitol Hill in Ottawa. And I find that very inspiring. I don't know yet whether this story will have a happy ending because the situation is still ongoing and the RCMP show no signs of backing down yet. But I can't help but feel hopeful. This situation has led to the greatest showing of civil disobedience in this so-called country that I can remember. A couple of years ago, this was a niche issue that I annoyed all my friends with. Now it's a national talking point, and people seem to recognize pretty clearly the rights of the Wet'suwet'en people are being violated. Even mainstream media outlets are careful to point out that the Wet'suwet'en people have never ceded their territory. A fact I would have expected most of them to conveniently ignore. I don't expect Canada or the RCMP or fucking TC Energy to do the right thing because of a compelling argument. You can't affect the conscience of people without a conscience. I do think that these acts of direct action are having an effect, and it's scaring the right people. Maybe let's go to the eyeball zone. Let's make a big thing out of it. Hello and welcome to the eyeball zone, etc., etc. On the website for the Unistaten camp, which is unistaten.camp, one of the camps within Wet'suwet'en Territory defending it from the RCMP and CGL, you can find a toolkit with instructions for how you can help. Everything from donating to contacting your MP if you're in Canada to raising awareness. It's all laid out for you in the ways that the Wet'suwet'en people would prefer you to do it. It could not be easier. You'll find a link in the description. The website also has a ton more information about the conflict than I'm able to outline here. Obviously, any ad money I get from this video in the first few months, that's where it's going. I'd love to just redirect ad money directly and permanently. Unfortunately, YouTube does not yet have that feature. Just trying to be transparent here. That's the only way I know how to do it. Do you have a project for the eyeball zone? Do the things I always say. And we're back. That's all the eyeballs you're gonna get this week. I thought, hey, somebody sent me a video about this topic, I should eyeball that, and then I checked, and I already did. Oops. This has been a depressing video. I do not know how to end it. It feels very inappropriate to make a joke about Grumbletum or whatever kind of bullshit I usually do, but I desperately want to deflect from the enormousness of this injustice and my own complicity in it as a tax-paying settler. Well, thanks for watching this one. I hope I did the subject justice. I would appreciate it if you would press the like button, and if you haven't already, if you could subscribe to me here on YouTube. I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/thoughtslime. Feeling a little uncomfortable pitching that, given the subject matter of this video. I also have another channel where you can go and watch me talk about horror movies. That's Scaredy Cats. youtube.com/scaredycatstv, link in the description. You can catch me live streaming on twitch.tv/thoughtslime every 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Oof. Oh my god, why am I like this? Bit late on the patron drawings this month. Went on vacation. Very cool of me. Feeling real good right now. I'm working on them. I'm trying. I'm a very slow artist.